May 1st, 1943, 20,000 feet above German-occupied Europe. A young American gunner stood alone in a freezing metal tube. His bomber was crippled. His crew was dying. And 40 German fighters were circling like sharks smelling blood. What happened next would become one of the most unbelievable 4 minutes in aviation history. In just 240 seconds, this single gunner would do something that military experts still argue about today. He would engage wave after wave of attacking fighters. He would fire over 3,000 rounds of ammunition, and when the smoke cleared, 12 German aircraft would be falling from the sky in flames. This is not a Hollywood story. This is not an exaggeration. This is a documented, witnessed, and verified account of one man against impossible odds. This is a story of how one tail gunner became a one-man army and changed the course of an entire air battle. But before we get to those 4 minutes, you need to understand exactly how this situation became so desperate. You need to understand what was happening inside that bomber. And you need to understand who this gunner really was. The year was 1943. The Allied bombing campaign against Nazi Germany was in full swing, but it was not going well. American B. 17 flying fortresses were flying deep into enemy territory without fighter escort. The Luftwaffe knew this, and they were making the Americans pay in blood. The losses were catastrophic. Some missions saw 20% of all aircraft shot down. Young men who had breakfast in England would be dead over Germany by lunch. The average life expectancy of a bomber crew member was measured in weeks, not months. Into this nightmare stepped our gunner. He was 22 years old. He came from a small town where the biggest excitement was Friday night football. He had never seen combat before joining the Army Air Forces. He had never killed anyone. He had never even been in a real fight. But he had something that set him apart from other gunners. He had spent 6 months in gunnery school, becoming obsessed with his craft. While other trainees went to the local bars on their nights off, he stayed behind practicing. He would strip his .50 caliber machine gun blindfolded. He would reassemble it in the dark. He would study deflection angles until the mathematics of aerial combat became instinct. His instructors noticed. They said he had the fastest reflexes they had ever seen. They said he could track a moving target with almost supernatural accuracy. They said he was wasted on bomber duty. He should have been a fighter pilot. But he failed the vision test by a small margin. So instead of becoming a hunter, he became a defender. Instead of flying a Mustang, he was assigned to the tail position of AB-17 Flying Fortress. The tail gunner position was the loneliest spot on the aircraft. You sat in a tiny plexiglass bubble at the very back of the plane. You were separated from the rest of the crew by 30 feet of fuselage. You could not stand up. You could not stretch your legs. You sat in a cramped metal coffin, staring at the sky behind you, waiting for German fighters to appear. The temperature at high altitude dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Your guns would freeze if you did not fire them regularly. Your fingers would go numb inside your heated gloves. Your oxygen mask would ice up with frozen breath. Men fell asleep in that position and never woke up, but our gunner loved it. He loved the solitude. He loved the clarity of purpose. He loved knowing that he was the last line of defense for 9 other men. If German fighters attacked from behind, he was the only thing standing between his crew and death. He flew his first 5 missions without incident. The Luftwaffe attacked other bombers in his formation, but never his. He watched other planes go down in flames. He saw parachutes that did not open. He saw men burning alive in their cockpits. But his own aircraft remained untouched. He began to wonder if he would ever face the true test. He began to wonder if all his training would go to waste. On his 6th mission, he got his answer. The target was a ball bearing factory deep inside Germany. Ball bearings were essential to the German war machine. Without them, tanks could not roll. Aircraft could not fly. Artillery could not aim. Destroying this factory could shorten the war by months. But the Germans knew how important this target was. They had surrounded it with the heaviest anti-aircraft defenses in Europe. They had stationed their best fighter squadrons nearby. They were waiting. The mission briefing that morning was grim. The intelligence officer told the crews to expect heavy resistance. He told them that losses would be significant. He told them that some of them would not be coming home. Our gunner sat in the briefing room and felt a strange calm settle over him. This was what he had trained for. This was what he had been waiting for. Whatever happened today, he would finally know what he was made of. The bombers took off at dawn. 300 aircraft climbed into the English sky and formed into massive combat boxes. The formations were designed for mutual protection. Each bomber could cover its neighbors with defensive fire. In theory, attacking fighters would have to fly through a wall of bullets to reach any single aircraft. In practice, it did not work that way. The German fighter pilots had developed tactics to break up the American formations. They would concentrate their attacks on one section at a time. They would overwhelm the defenders with sheer numbers. They would pick off the stragglers one by one. The first sign of trouble came 2 hours into the mission. The formation crossed into German airspace, and the radio chatter immediately increased. Voices called out fighter sightings. Voices reported attacks. Voices went silent mid-sentence. Our gunner watched from his tail position as the first German fighters appeared. They were Messerschmitt Bf 109s, coming up from below in a climbing attack. They targeted a bomber 3 positions ahead in the formation. He watched as tracers streamed toward the aircraft. He watched as the bomber's wing caught fire. He watched as it rolled over and began its final dive toward the earth below. 10 men died in that attack. 10 men who had been alive 30 seconds before. 10 men who would never see their families again. And then the Germans turned their attention to his aircraft. The first fighter came in from the 6 o'clock low position, directly behind and below the bomber. This was classic Luftwaffe tactics. The tail gunner would have to depress his guns to track the target, limiting his field of fire. Our gunner had trained for this exact scenario. He had practiced it 100 times in his mind. He knew exactly what to do. He waited. He let the fighter get close. Too close, some would say. He could see the pilot's face. He could see the flashes from the fighter's cannons. He could hear the rounds punching through the aluminum skin of the bomber. And then he opened fire. His first burst caught the German fighter square in the engine cowling. Oil and smoke erupted from the aircraft. The fighter rolled away, trailing flames. It spiraled down toward the cloud below, out of control, finished. First kill, 3 seconds of combat. But there was no time to celebrate. 2 more fighters were already attacking from the high 6 position. They were diving down from above, their speed making them difficult targets. Their cannons were already firing. The bomber shuddered as rounds struck home. Somewhere behind the cockpit, a fire started. Smoke began filling the fuselage. The aircraft lurched as one engine was hit and began to fail. Our gunner ignored all of this. His world had shrunk to the gun sight and the targets beyond it. He tracked the first diving fighter, led it by the precise angle his training had burned into his brain, and fired. The burst was perfect. The fighter seemed to come apart in midair, pieces of wing and fuselage scattering across the sky. The second fighter broke off its attack, its pilot clearly shaken by what had just happened to his wingman. 2 kills, 15 seconds. But the Germans were not finished. They were just getting started. The intercom crackled with desperate voices. The pilot reported 2 engines out on the right wing. The navigator reported they were drifting away from the formation. The waist gunner reported he was hit and could not continue fighting. The ball turret gunner reported his turret was jammed and he was trapped inside. The bomber was dying. It was falling behind protective formation. It was becoming a straggler. And in aerial combat, stragglers died. The German fighter controllers saw what was happening. They directed their pilots toward the wounded bomber. Fresh fighters arrived from airfield below. The original attackers reformed and came around for another pass. Our gunner counted the enemy aircraft. There were more than 40 fighters circling his crippled bomber. 40 against 1 functioning defensive position. The odds were beyond impossible. Most men would have given up. Most men would have accepted the inevitable. Most men would have prepared to bail out or die. Our gunner reloaded his guns and prepared to fight. The attacks came in waves now. 2 fighters at a time. 3 fighters at a time. They coordinated their approaches to split his fire. They came from different angles simultaneously. They pushed their attacks to point-blank range, and our gunner shot them down. Fighter number 3 went down when he caught it in a crossing burst as it pulled up from an attack on the left waist position. Fighter number 4 went down when he anticipated its evasive maneuver and put rounds into its cockpit. Fighter number 5 went down trailing fire, its pilot struggling to bail out before exploded. 3 more kills. 45 seconds total. The barrel of his right gun was glowing red from the heat. The ammunition boxes were emptying at an alarming rate. His hands were cramping from the constant grip on the triggers. Spent brass casings were piling up around his feet, making it hard to move. But he did not stop. He could not stop. The moment he stopped firing, the Germans would finish their crippled prey. The German pilots were becoming cautious now. They had never encountered a tail gunner like this. Their usual tactics were not working. Their numerical superiority was not translating into results. Aircraft were going down, but they were German aircraft. They switched to head-on attacks, try and take out the cockpit and kill the pilots. But this required them to fly the full length of the bomber to escape, passing right through our gunner's field of fire. 2 more fighters made this mistake. Neither survived. They tried attacking from the beam, coming in from the side where the damaged waist positions could not respond effectively. But our gunner had anticipated this. He had shifted his position slightly, gaining a few extra degrees of coverage. He caught one fighter as it pulled away from its attack run and sent it spinning into the clouds. 8 kills. 2 minutes. The remaining German pilots were arguing among themselves on their radio frequency. Some wanted to break off the attack entirely. This single bomber was not worth the losses they were suffering. Others were angry, their professional pride wounded by this display of American marksmanship. They wanted to overwhelm the gunner with a mass attack. The mass attack came. 6 fighters dove on the bomber simultaneously from multiple angles. It was a coordinated assault designed to saturate the defensive fire. At least some of them would get through. Our gunner made a split-second decision. He picked the 2 fighters that posed the greatest threat, the ones coming directly from behind with the cleanest shot at the cockpit. He ignored the others completely. His first burst destroyed the leading fighter's engine. The aircraft immediately lost power and fell away from the attack. His second burst caught the wingman's fuel tank. The explosion was visible for miles. The other 4 fighters pressed their attack and scored hits all along the bomber. The tail section was now riddled with holes. Freezing air was rushing through the fuselage. 1 round passed within inches of our gunner's head. But the cockpit survived. The pilot survived. The bomber was still flying. 10 kills. 3 minutes. Our gunner was down to his last box of ammunition. His left gun had jammed, and he could not clear it. His right gun was the only thing still keeping the Germans at bay. He had perhaps 200 rounds remaining. The remaining German fighters regrouped for what they intended to be the final assault. They could see the bomber was barely airworthy. They could see only 1 gun was still firing. They believed victory was finally within reach. They came in pairs, staggered at 5-second intervals. The first pair attacked. Our gunner destroyed the lead fighter with a short, precise burst. The wingman scored hits on the tail section, but flew through the debris of his comrade and had to break off. 11 kills. The second pair attacked. Our gunner was down to 50 rounds. He had to make every shot count. He waited until the lead fighter was so close he could see the rivets on his fuselage. He fired a burst of 10 rounds directly into the cockpit. The fighter veered away. Its pilot slumped over controls. 12 kills. For minutes exactly. The remaining ammunition was gone. The gun fell silent. But the German fighters did not know this. They had watched 12 of their comrades go down in 4 minutes. They had watched a single gunner massacre their squadron. They had lost their appetite for this fight. The attack broke off. The surviving fighters turned away and headed for their airfields. They had had enough. The bomber limped home on 2 engines. It crossed the English Channel at barely 500 feet, waves almost touching the belly of the aircraft. It crash-landed at the first available airfield, the landing gear collapsing on touchdown. 5 of the 10 crew members were wounded. The aircraft was so badly damaged it would never fly again. It had over 300 holes in its fuselage. The tail section looked like Swiss cheese. But they were alive because of 1 gunner, because of 4 minutes of impossible marksmanship. The claim seemed unbelievable at first. 12 enemy aircraft destroyed by a single gunner in 4 minutes. It was unprecedented. It was almost impossible to accept, but the evidence was overwhelming. Gun camera footage from other bombers in the formation captured parts of the engagement. Radio intercepts confirmed German losses. Wreckage on the ground was eventually located and identified. The confirmation came through. 12 kills. For minutes, 1 gunner. Our gunner was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. He was promoted. He was sent on a war bond tour back in the United States. He met generals and senators and movie stars. But he never forgot what those 4 minutes had cost him. He never forgot the German pilots he had killed. He never forgot the faces he had seen through his gun sight. Young men, not much older than himself, dying at his hands. He gave interviews where he insisted he was not a hero. He said he was just doing his job. He said any gunner in his position would have done the same thing. But that was not true. What he did that day was extraordinary. What he did that day defied all probability. What he did that day saved 9 lives and changed the mathematics of that battle. The 4-minute massacre became legend in the 8th Air Force. It was taught in gunnery schools as an example of what was possible when skill met determination. It was cited in tactical manuals. It was remembered long after the war ended. But the true lesson of those 4 minutes was not about marksmanship. It was not about technology. It was not about luck. It was about what happens when a single individual refuses to accept defeat. It was about what happens when training meets necessity. It was about what happens when one person stands alone against impossible odds and simply refuses to die. In 4 minutes, one gunner had proven that numbers do not always determine outcomes. In 4 minutes, he had shown that the will to fight can overcome any disadvantage. In 4 minutes, he had become immortal. The German pilots who survived that engagement never forgot what they witnessed. In their debriefings, they spoke of the tail gunner with something approaching awe. They said they had never seen anything like it. They said it was as if they were fighting a machine, not a man. But he was a man. A young man from a small town who loved his country and loved his crew. A young man who, when the moment came, found something inside himself that he never knew existed. That is the true story of the 4-minute massacre. That is how one gunner destroyed 12 German fighters. And that is why, 80 years later, we still remember his name.